Beneath the ruins of Eridu, the city the Sumerians themselves called the first city on Earth, archaeologists dug down through 18 layers of temple, each one built on the broken pieces of the last. At the very bottom, below all of them, they found a sealed room. No door, no writing. Just a room of mud brick packed shut before the first king was ever named. Inside were human bones, and a lab finally pulled DNA from the bone. The results were supposed to prove who built the world's first city. At least, that was the plan. If you're into ancient mysteries and the gene discoveries that keep rewriting them, hit subscribe. I cover forgotten history and forbidden archaeology every week. Eridu was supposed to be the easy answer. For more than 100 years, it was the one place archaeologists could point to and say, for sure, this is where it started. The first city, the first temple. The first proof that civilization had a beginning we could actually stand on, measure, and date. That sureness is the exact thing the sealed room took apart. But in 1946, when the real dig began, Eridu was nothing but a low mound of sand and broken brick in the southern Iraqi desert, about 15 miles from the ancient ruins of Ur. The site has a modern name, Tel Abu Shirain. A British official named John George Taylor first found it back in 1855, came across bricks with writing on them, knew the name Eridu, and then, by his own telling, walked away, not impressed. He saw water channels, broken pieces of stone columns, and a black granite lion lying half buried in the sand, and he decided the place was not worth coming back to. He was looking at one of the most important dig sites on the planet, and he missed it. The Sumerians did not miss it. To them, Eridu was not just old, it was the starting point of everything. Their king list, a record carved in cuneiform near the end of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, opens with a single line that experts argued over for hundreds of years. After kingship came down from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, not Uruk, not Ur, Eridu. The first king on the list, a figure named Alulim, was said to have ruled for 28,800 years. The Sumerians believed the gods set up order on earth here, and that the city was the home of Enki, their god of fresh water, wisdom, and the deep. Enki's temple at Eridu had a name, the Iabzu. It means, more or less, the house of the aquifer, the house built over the deep waters. And here is the detail that matters. When a proper dig finally reached Eridu, led by the Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar and the British archaeologist Seton Lloyd between 1946 and 1949, they did not find one temple. They found a stack of them, temple built on temple, going down. Each new generation had torn down the old shrine, flattened it, and raised a new one right on top, a little larger every time. The team counted 18 separate temple levels, stacked one inside the next. That stack of temples is its own kind of clock. The top of it dates to the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. The bottom of it, the first rough shrine, dates to around 5,400 before the Common Era. That is 7,400 years ago. A single holy spot, used without a break, rebuilt over and over for nearly 2,000 years before the first written word existed anywhere on Earth. For decades, the bottom layer was treated as the floor of the story, the beginning. There was nothing under the first temple except the natural sand dune the city was built on. That belief held until a survey team came back to the temple mound and decided to test what was actually under that first shrine. What they found was not sand. Roughly 2 meters below the base of the oldest known temple at Eridu, the team's ground probes picked up an empty space, not a natural gap. The readings showed straight edges and square corners, the sign of something built. When they dug down to it, they uncovered a small box-shaped room, walls of mud brick. The bricks themselves a slightly different mix than anything in the temples above. The room had been packed solid with clean fill, on purpose, by hand. And it had no way in. No doorway, no shaft, no stair. Whoever made this room had built it, used it, and then sealed it from the outside, with the clear goal that no one would ever walk back in. Inside the fill, the team found human bones. At least 3 people. They were not laid out the way Sumerian burials were laid out. There were no grave goods of the usual kind. No clay pots, no beads, no offering bowls. The bones had simply been placed, and the room had been closed. Now, this is where the work shifts from archaeology into genetics, and where the story stops being simple, because the obvious next question was the one everyone wanted answered. Who were they? And for the first time, there was a way to actually find out. Here is the problem that makes this so hard, and it is worth understanding before we go further. Pulling ancient DNA out of Mesopotamia is close to impossible. DNA is a delicate thing. It breaks down with heat, with damp, with time. The cold, dry caves of Siberia and the frozen ground of northern Europe keep genetic material safe for tens of thousands of years. Southern Iraq does the opposite. It is hot, the water sits high in the ground, and the soil itself is harsh on anything once alive. For years, this was the single biggest gap in human history. We had the bones of the first city builders, and we could not read them. The Sumerians, the people who invented writing, the wheel, the city itself, could not be seen in the genes at all. The Eridu room changed the odds. Sealed spaces keep things safe. The room had been packed airtight, 2 meters underground, untouched for over 7,000 years. The steady temperature and the lack of moving water gave the bone a fighting chance. A genetics team took samples from the hardest surviving bone in the human body, the petrous part of the temporal bone, the part of the skull around the inner ear. It is the best choice for ancient DNA work because it guards genetic material better than any other bone. The lab ran the test. Then they ran it again. Then a third time, on a separate sample, in a separate clean room, to rule out any mix-up. Each time, the same result came back. And the result did not match what anyone had filed it under. The belief going in was simple. The people in the sealed room would be early Sumerians, or the people who came before the Sumerians, the farmers of the Ubaid culture who built that first temple around 5,400 before the Common Era. The DNA should fit neatly into the genetic story of Mesopotamia. It should connect to the later people of the city above. It did not. The genetic signal pulled in a whole different direction. The closest matches in the comparison database were not from southern Iraq at all. They grouped with ancient peoples from far outside Mesopotamia, a bloodline that, going by every migration map ever drawn, had no business being buried under the first city on Earth, generations before that city was built. This is the part that still doesn't make sense, so let's slow down and look at exactly why it matters. When gene scientists talk about ancestry, they are talking about patterns. Groups of people carry their own mix of genetic markers, and those mixes move and blend in ways you can track as people migrate. What everyone expected for early Mesopotamia was a blend of two known sources: local hunter-gatherer groups from the area, and farmer groups moving in from the north and east, from Anatolia and the Zagros Mountains, the people who carried farming into the river valley. That blend made the Ubaid culture, and the Ubaid culture made the Sumerians. That is the textbook chain. The bones from the room broke the chain. Their main ancestry part did not belong to either of those expected sources, and the timing made it worse. The remains were carbon dated, and the dates came back older than the temple right above them. The people in the sealed room were in that spot before there was a shrine, before there was a city, before there was a reason for anyone to be at Eridu at all. So you have a sealed, doorless room, built by hand, holding the carefully placed bones of people whose ancestry points somewhere off the map, buried at the exact spot that a whole civilization would later swear was the birthplace of the world. That is not an accident. A careful researcher can wave away. And the strange genetic finding did not end with the bones in the room. The same team did something smart. They compared the room's DNA against samples taken from later burials in the upper layers of Eridu, the actual Sumerian people of the city, the people who lived and were buried there during the city's long life. If the room's group had simply ended, a closed line, a cutoff group with no descendants, you would expect their unusual mark to vanish completely from the later record. It did not vanish. A faint trace of it carried forward. The later Sumerian samples from Eridu showed a small ancestry part, small but steady, that matched the room's bloodline and matched nothing else nearby. The people in the sealed room were not a closed line. They left descendants. Their genetic mark grew thinner over the generations, watered down by everyone the city took in, but it never fully disappeared. It ran through the whole history of the first city, all the way to the top of the mound. There is one more piece, and it is the piece that pushes this past curiosity and into something truly strange. The team did not stop at the bones and the later burials. They checked the room's bloodline against the wider database of ancient genomes pulled from across the Ubaid world, the scattered early settlements of southern Mesopotamia that came before the rise of the great Sumerian cities. The point was simple. If this group was a normal local group, just one the maps had drawn too small, their mark should turn up at other Ubaid sites too. Founding groups leave traces. They spread. The mark did not spread. It showed up at Eridu and almost nowhere else. The The room's bloodline was not a local group that just happened to be missed. It was packed, almost too neatly, into a single spot. The first city. And it sat there, in the ground, before that city had any reason to exist. That is the detail that makes a careful researcher uneasy. A group on the move leaves a trail. A trade network leaves a trail. This left a point. One spot on the map, sealed and on purpose, with a genetic identity that reaches out to far-off peoples and connects to almost nothing in the land right around it. Which raises a question the first dig never had the tools to ask. What if the room was not a burial at all, in the way we usually mean the word? What if it was a foundation? Let's pull back for a second, because this connects to something far bigger than one room. Across the ancient Near East, there is a well-recorded practice that archaeologists call the foundation deposit. When a temple or an important building was put up, people placed objects, and sometimes human or animal remains, under the foundations. The deposit made the ground holy. It linked the new building to something the builders saw as sacred, ancestral, or powerful. The building above was, in a real way, an answer to whatever was buried below it. Now put that next to Eridu. You have a sealed room holding the remains of a genetically separate group. And then, right on top of that room, the very first temple of the Iabzu is built. And then another on top of that. And another. For 2,000 years, generation after generation rebuilt their holiest building on the exact same ground, never moving it, never leaving it, as if the spot itself was the point. What if they were building on top of those people on purpose? What if the sealed room was not forgotten under the temple? What if the temple existed because of the room? The Sumerians had a word for the kind of figures who lived in that space between human and divine. Their myths are full of them. The Apkallu, the seven sages, beings of great knowledge who, the texts say, lived before the great flood and brought the building blocks of civilization to humankind. The Apkallu were tied above all to one city, Eridu, and to one god. Enki, the god of the Iabzu, the god of the deep waters that the room was, quite literally, buried under. Sumerian tradition is clear that the knowledge came first and the cities came after. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest surviving stories in the world, describes a time before cities, when humans wandered without order, and then describes the gods setting up the first towns, with Eridu at the head of the list. The civilization, in their own telling, was given, installed. It did not grow slowly out of the mud, it arrived. For a long time, that was filed under myth, a poetic memory, a culture making its own beginnings sound grand. But set the myth beside the room for a moment. A genetically separate group, there at the site before the city, sealed under the ground in a doorless room, at the exact spot later cultures would call the home of the beings who brought knowledge from before the flood. The myth and the room are telling a strangely alike story, one in the language of gods and sages, one in the language of mitochondrial markers and carbon dates. This does not prove the Apkallu were real beings. It is not proof of visitors from anywhere. What it shows is that the Sumerian belief in Eridu as the starting point may not have been made up out of nothing. It may have been a memory of a real group of people, truly different from the people around them, who were at that spot first, and whose presence mattered enough that a whole civilization built its sacred map around their grave. Which brings us to the harder, more down-to-earth explanation, and we have to take it seriously because it is probably closer to the truth than anything involving the supernatural. Here's the version that needs no mystery at all. The Ubaid period in southern Mesopotamia, the centuries around 5,400, before the Common Era, was a time of movement. Groups of people did not stay put. People moved along the rivers, along the Persian Gulf coastline, which sat much further inland then than it does now. Trade networks reached in every direction. It is fully possible that the people in the room belonged to a small founding group, travelers from a more far-off region, who arrived at the future site of Eridu, set up the first settlement, and were later honored by their descendants as the founders. Not gods, not sages, just the first families. And the unusual ancestry is simply the genetic fingerprint of a long journey that the textbook maps drew too small. That explanation covers the strange genetic finding. It covers the older dates. It covers the faint bloodline carrying forward into the later city, because the descendants of founders would, of course, still be there. And it casts the sealed room not as something dark, but as something deeply human. A community keeping its founders close, building its temple over them, remembering where it came from. But that down-to-earth version still leaves two things unexplained. and a careful researcher does not get to ignore them. The first is the seal itself. Foundation deposits are common. Doorless, carefully packed, fully sealed rooms built before the building above them are not. Most foundation deposits are exactly that, deposits, objects lowered into a pit. This was a built room with walls that someone went to real effort to close for good. Effort tells you something. Whatever was in that room, the people who sealed it did not want it touched, and they wanted that badly enough to wall it off from history. The second is the bricks. The room's mud brick was noted as having a different makeup from the temple bricks above it. Different clay source, different mix. That is a small detail, but it means the room was not built by the same hands, with the same materials as the first temple. It came from somewhere else, or from someone else, or from an older tradition that the temple builders did not share. The room is not just older than the city, it may come from a separate culture entirely, and this is where the search, for now, stops. The Eridu digs have been broken off again and again by war, by political unrest, by the simple fact that southern Iraq has been one of the hardest places on Earth to do steady archaeology for the last 40 years. A full genetic read of the room's remains, the kind of deep study that could pin down exactly where that bloodline began, has not been finished and published in full. The samples exist. The money and the calm needed to finish the work have not always followed. So here is where we actually stand. Eridu is real, and it truly is the oldest city in the Sumerian record, lived in from around 5,400 before the Common Era. The stacked temples of the Iabzu are real, 18 of them, rebuilt on the same spot for 2,000 years. A sealed room under the oldest temple, holding human remains, fits the well-known ancient practice of foundation deposits. The genetic signal from those remains, if the study holds, points to a group that does not fit the standard migration model for early Mesopotamia, and a thinner version of that same signal seems to carry forward into the later people of the city. Is this proof of gods, sages, or visitors who installed civilization at Eridu? No. The supernatural reading is not where the evidence leads. But is it proof that the story of how civilization began is more tangled and more interesting than the clean textbook chain of hunter-gatherers plus northern farmers equals Sumer? The room suggests yes. The thing worth sitting with is not the mystery of one room. It is what that room hints about every origin story we think we have settled. We tend to treat the beginning of civilization as a solved problem, a checked box, a date on a chart. Eridu was the safe answer. The first city, accounted for. And 2 meters under the first temple of the first city, there was a sealed room full of people who were not supposed to be there, telling us the box was never really closed. Every civilization that came after Sumer carried the same instinct: build on what came before, raise the new temple on the old foundation. Honor the origin, even when you no longer remember what the origin actually was. The Sumerians did it for 2,000 years at Eridu, stacking shrine on shrine, and the whole time, the answer to where they came from was sealed in the dark right under their feet. We are still doing it now. We just call our version history. The sealed room under Eridu is still only partway studied. The bones are recorded. No one has published the full genome yet. The bricks of that doorless room are a different clay than the city built above them, and nobody can yet say where that clay, or those people, came from. The Sumerians called Eridu the place where kingship first came down from heaven. They may simply have been remembering, in the only language they had, the people in the room nobody was ever meant to open. If forgotten history like this is what you're here for, you need to see what I'm covering next. The Sumerian tablet that records a star that showed up, stayed for a generation, and then vanished, and the modern survey that may have found where it landed. Click the video on screen now.